Don Lewis, coming to you from the beautiful metaverse, and more specifically, beautiful Danville, Illinois. And welcome to Midday with Rev Don. And it's good to see you, so to speak. And I want to remind you that if you'd like to take part in the conversation, you can type your comments or questions into whatever platform you happen to be watching this on, and it will appear in my chat room, and we can talk directly. And I very much enjoy that aspect of this broadcast. I hope you do too. And otherwise, we will just have a lovely one-sided conversation. But I have to say the last few broadcasts have been particularly interesting conversations, I think. We've been dealing with a number of existential issues, which we've come around to in various ways. Today, I thought I would talk first about my recent seminar. Over the weekend, if you don't know, I did my first Patreon seminar. And for people who are following me on my Patreon, I have a seminar tier where you get a monthly seminar. You can just attend the seminar as a member of that tier, or if you're not a member of that tier on my Patreon, you can buy a ticket and attend just the same. This first seminar was on the nature and practice of magic, and I was exceedingly happy with it. And the people who attended seemed pretty happy with it as well. We had a good turnout, and I suppose for someone who's taught as many classes as I have taught, and as many live online classes as I have taught, it probably sounds silly for me to say that I was very pleased to stay focused and on point and hit all the points I wanted to make, but I still pay attention to that sort of thing. I organized my thoughts with an outline and then spoke otherwise extemporaneously. And after the seminar, we had a lovely conversation on the topic. And if you are a member of my Patreon at the seminar tier and you were not able to attend, it was recorded, and you can access it on my Patreon if you have that eligibility. And hello to Janet in the chat room. It's good to see you. And of course, when I refer to that tier, it's that tier and every tier above it. So it's a good number of Patreons. And I'm currently thinking in terms of what will the next seminar be, but I am not quite that far along yet. But I'll announce it soon. Hello to Brenda in the chat room. Good to see you, Brenda. And some of the possible things might be the nature and practice of the psychic arts, how to bring through an oracle or how oracles work. I'm not sure. There are a lot of possibilities. Working with the spirit of place might be an interesting thing to talk about. If you have any subject you'd like to see me talk about, feel free to recommend it. Maybe how to do a seance. That might be a fun one, but I kind of feel like I should save that toward October because that's when everybody will be thinking of seances. Stereotyped as that may be. But one of the things I've done repeatedly over the years is hold seances in October because, again, that's when the public mind turns to such matters. And they've always been quite well received. And I'm thinking I will probably do that online in some way this year. Hello to Bradley in the chat room. Bradley says, Happy Monday. Happy Monday to you, Bradley, and to everyone watching. It is a happy Monday. So we'll see what that next seminar is. But I was very pleased with this first one. And I suppose it wasn't exactly uncharted territory because I've done live online classes before, but it was the first Patreon seminar, and it just made me feel good to have that interaction with people. And the questions and conversation afterward went half as long as the seminar itself, so it definitely did engage people. And that pleases me. I am looking at doing a lot more live teaching as we go forward with Psychic Academy, the classes, at least the initial classes, will be offered in the same live format, live online format, and I'm looking forward to that. That will be starting September 6th. We'll talk a lot more about that in the future. Um, but we've talked a little bit about it already, including that start date. And in this case, I'll be focusing particularly on the psychic arts. Now, of course, um, in terms of the things that I have done through witch school and the Correllian tradition, they touched on the psychic arts considerably because I consider that an important part of a Correllian priesthood. But it was not necessarily the main focus, whereas here it will be. And there are different considerations, I would have to say, when you make it the main focus. Bradley says, I lost power Saturday afternoon, so I missed it. I can't wait for future ones. And we did actually record the seminar, and I put the link out to those people eligible to see it on Patreon. If you missed it, contact me. I can send you the link to watch it after the fact. I know that's not necessarily as exciting as seeing it live, but all the stuff is there. So it is still very informative. And of course, and I think I even commented about this during the seminar. If you've taken my degree lessons, if you've read my books, most of this is not new material to you. It's the nature and practice of magic. It's what I've been teaching for decades now. But it's restated in a different way. It's restated in a single hour as opposed to a 3-year period. And it deals with, I think, some of the more important aspects of working with magic, especially deeper magic, that certainly I talk about, but maybe not in quite so compact a manner. And Bradley says, I'll watch it. I saw the link on Patreon. Very cool. And, I also, years ago, I had the privilege of interviewing 2 Llewellyn executives. One of them was Alicia Gallo, who I believe is still very important in the Llewellyn organization. And I asked them the question that was on everyone's mind at that time, which was, why so many 101 books? Why keep restating this same 101 material again and again? Hello to Michael in the chat room. Good to see you, Michael. And Alicia's, their answer, and you can see this interview on Magic TV, but the answer that they made was that there are always new people coming in who need to have this material restated for them. And I kind of have taken that to heart as I've gone forward, that there are certainly times when you're only speaking to an advanced audience, but very often that's not the case. And even when you are restating the basics, and this seminar certainly went over more than just the basics, but restating the basics is still important. I can tell you that even after all these years and all these work, all the work I've done in these years, there are times I forget simple things because, perhaps because they are simple. And it doesn't hurt to be reminded. And I'm now at the note-taking stage of my life. So if something important occurs to me, I write it down because I need my exterior hard drive for functioning. But although I've actually done that for years and years. But sometimes those very simple things you are not the first thing you think of. When you know lots of convoluted techniques, the really simple ones may not be the ones that first occur to you, and yet they're often the most effective. I find that some of the very first things I learned, some of the very simplest things I learned, are still the most effective all these years later. Hello, Diane in the chat room. Good to see you, Diane. And I cannot stress that enough, that it's very important to constantly be learning. I often refer to Lady Crystal's injunction when I had my 3rd degree 40 some years ago. that this was a beginning to my education, not the end, that I must never stop learning. And I'd like to feel that I've taken those words to heart all these years, and that I'm still trying to learn more and always will continue that. But it's also important to hold on to what you've already learned and continue to use it. And, I have to say, there have been many times in life that I've been reminded of that simple technique that I know perfectly well and have taught others, but had not thought of in the moment when I needed it. So I think restating basics is an important thing. Now, Brenda, hello, Brenda, in the chat room. It's good to see you. And Brenda says, I have suggested a good workshop would be a back to basics for something like the lustration of the ancestors. Yes, I could certainly do that. Let me write that down. Especially as we approach the regional illustrations. And of course, Lord Phoenix will be having a regional illustration in Buffalo. There'll be one at the Parliament of the World's Religions. And of course, the regional illustrations are the illustration of the living, whereas Brenda's referring to the illustration of the ancestors. But I think addressing both of them could be beneficial. And hello to Anna in the chat room. And Anna would love to hear more about Lady Crystal and loves her YouTube videos, but her YouTube videos are all that she knows about her. And so I'll see if I can't talk more about her. Lady Crystal has written a number of things over the years, but many of them are not immediately accessible. She wrote the book, Living the Wiccan Life. Debbie Tompkins and I then re-edited it for final publication, but it's Crystal's writing. And I'm hoping to bring that out again one day. But it is a good look into her teachings and how she approaches certain things that I'm less given to approaching. She has some very interesting things in there, including the idea of death walking, which is practicing your transition to the other world before it comes time to make it, which I think is a sensible thing. But then I also would say that if you're doing work with the spirit world on a regular basis, even if you're not intentionally doing that, you're unconsciously doing it. I think those of us who do work with spirits are able to cross much more quickly than those who don't, simply because we've made that crossing so many times. Lady Wendy showed this. She was visiting people within days of crossing over, which is not what happens to the ordinary spirit. The ordinary spirit, you want to give them at least a year for both themselves and yourself to acclimate to the change, and then have communication with them. But someone like Wendy, who is an accomplished world walker, and I would assume when my time comes, someone like myself or Lady Crystal, that's not necessarily needed. It was needed for my mother, and I want to say my mother took at least 2 years before I could have regular communication with her. But there were other things going on there, and they had to do with my father, more than with my mother being acclimated to the next life, but she was trying to work with him and the difficulties he was experiencing. And I was not equally in need. So things will be very different depending on the circumstance. But generally, when someone crosses over, we can honor their spirit immediately, but we should not try to communicate with it, usually until about a year has passed, unless they start communicating with us. Now, if they start communicating with us, that means they're ready. But generally, they're not ready that quickly. And this has to do with getting acclimated to the next life, also healing that occurs for the spirit when it first crosses over. But most importantly, it's our healing. I often hear people talk about someone who's died pulling on their loved ones as if they're trying to get them to cross over with them. And although I won't say that never happens, I think that it's actually we who are pulling. I think very often when someone we love has crossed, there's a part of us that wants to go with them. But we might think it's them pulling us, but it's actually us pulling to follow. And this is one of the reasons for that year of mourning, year of creating distance, so that when we do speak to them, we don't have that pull to join them. Of course, in ancient times, it wasn't uncommon for people to do exactly that, to um, to join the loved one who had just crossed over more or less immediately. Um, but as a culture, we outgrew that because we realized that that union will come later if uh, if we go forward. Um, and that with a reasonable mourning period, we can go on here. But it's often quite difficult when we've lost someone we love very, very dearly. Hello to Maggie in the chat room. Good to see you, Maggie. Lady Crystal, I've often said that I was very, very fortunate to have her as a teacher. That was true of all my teachers. My mother was also a major teacher. Crystal's mother was a major teacher. Um, And they had certain things in common, including the fact that they all had a very laid back attitude and a very patient attitude. Um, I often cite as an example that when I was studying for third degree, some of the concepts in our third degree were difficult to wrap my mind around, to the point that I really couldn't. Um, I was also still quite young at this time. But I don't know that it would have made a difference if I were older. They're outside of our society's mainstream of thought. But Lady Crystal's response to this was, "Oh, well, that's fine. We'll come back to it later." She didn't try to force it. She didn't try to insist on it. She said, "Here, let's look at this thing in our studies instead." And when we did come back to it, about 6 months later, I found I no longer had any difficulty understanding it. Even though we had not revisited it in that time, either my consciousness had expanded um, without my conscious participation, or other things we touched on had helped it to expand, but the difficulty was no longer there. And so I think patience is always the best way to approach these things. And I see people who teach metaphysics and they don't have that patience. They want everything done a certain way in a certain time. And um, I don't know that that's the most productive way to do things, because sometimes a person will have a blockage or just an inability to grasp a certain subject. Whereas um, if you're patient, this is resolvable. If you insist on dealing with it right then, it may not be. I take the same attitude a lot in terms of people's attitudes. I'm a great believer in the idea that if you make something a contest of wills, um, you may turn it into an irresolvable stalemate. Whereas if you take a more patient attitude towards it, the person may quickly come to a more amenable position with you. A lot of times, if you force a person into making a situation the hill that they must die on, they will not be able to reconsider that, even though it was never a hill they should have been dying on. This certainly should not be the case when we're teaching. If a person's not able to grasp something at that moment, it means you need to find another approach, which may simply be another time, or maybe another approach. But it does not mean that that subject cannot be taught. It does not mean that that person cannot learn it. It means that right at that moment, there's a problem. And I think this is a very important thing really to apply throughout our lives. Now, I have to say that sometimes that's caused me to be overly patient and overly forgiving in places where maybe I should have taken a harder line. And this is something very much in my mind lately as I contemplate certain situations. Um, that trying to take that patient point of view, um, if someone is behaving badly, is not always the same positive strategy that it is when someone is merely having difficulty. If you find someone is deliberately behaving badly, I think you need to take a somewhat stronger point of view on the subject. I'm not really accustomed to doing that, but I'm finding it's something I must be mindful of. And at some point, I'll probably speak about that, but I'm not quite there yet. Hello to Diane in the chat room. It's good to see you, Diane. And Brenda says, everyone learns in a different way, and this is certainly very true. I've always been very strong on the idea that we don't want to have in our teachings cookie cutter outcomes. And so we cannot really use cookie cutter teachings. The ability to vary our techniques, to vary our approach, I think is very important. And the ability to allow people to play to their strengths is very important, because we don't all have the same strengths. Not only do we not all have the same strengths, but if we all had only the same strengths, we would not be strong, because we need a diversity of talents and abilities to go forward. If all you've got are clones of yourself, then whatever your weaknesses are going to be magnified. This is the same principle that makes inbreeding a bad thing. It is true that the immediate result of inbreeding can sometimes be good. This is something not always spoken of, because we don't want to encourage it, because the long-term effect is very bad. And the immediate result of cookie cutter training might seem good, but in the long term, it deprives you of talents that other people might bring in if they're allowed to be more diverse. I'm a great believer in diversity. I'm a great believer in breadth of knowledge. I've heard the phrase used, a mile wide and an inch deep, which I think we're far deeper than that, and I think that just looking at these last few days of talking will show the depth of our teachings. But that's beside the point, that being a mile wide is still a good thing. I would far rather be a mile wide and an inch deep than an inch wide and an inch deep. And unfortunately, there are a lot of people who play to that dynamic. And but of course, the ideal is to be a mile wide and a mile deep. And I think that's where we are. I think that our teachings on incarnation and reincarnation and the character of the soul and working with the spirits, and so many other issues are far deeper than what you generally encounter. You just don't get it on the first day. Nor would you necessarily want to, in my opinion. And Diane says, I lost my son last July to an overdose. I'm very sorry, Diane. I did go to a medium who made contact with him about 6 months after he passed. I hope this didn't hurt him. And I would say no. If he was able to be contacted, then he was ready to be contacted. Had he not been ready, he would have probably made that clear, or it would have shown in the results. But even then, it wouldn't have hurt him. It just wouldn't have been a satisfactory experience. Everyone is ready when they're ready. And also the fact that he was contacted at that point, there may have been ongoing healing, but that contact wouldn't necessarily disrupt it. When I talk about giving a year, it's a general statement, and it can be different for different people. And again, and it also depends on what you're doing. I'm talking about the kind of daily contact we have with spirit guides, as opposed to an occasional encounter. But Generally speaking, I think that year is as much for us as it is for them. It's hard to let go. And um, this is especially true for people who've been together for a long time. There's a famous phenomenon where one spouse will pass and the other will pass within 1 to 2 years. Um, and this is why. Um, that connection is so strong that they choose to follow, not consciously, but at a soul level, and others don't. And whatever they do is the right thing for them. It it's always difficult to look at such situations. And Diane says, I was told not to light candles inside the home in the first year of someone's passing. Well, you see, this is the same concept I'm talking about. I think I would interpret that as don't light candles to them during that first year necessarily. But there are a lot of different beliefs, and a lot of them are intended to allow that separation to occur. What Diane is referring to is intended to allow that separation to occur. And the idea of not lighting the candle, we talked about this the other day, that things can only manifest using the energy that's there to manifest with. And one of the reasons we light candles is to generate extra energy. So I would say that's probably the origin. I don't personally follow that teaching, but I do believe in waiting that year for most occasions before contacting someone who has crossed over. Now, there are exceptions to this also. One of the main exceptions being if you're a world walker. One of the things that can be very good to do is the crossing of the spirit, making sure they have, to use the cliched term, gone into the light, that they have released and moved forward. And this is something that a world walker might do. Any person can do it, but it's something that commonly a world walker would do. And that you don't wait for. In fact, if you can do it even before the person has died, I think that can be good. And what you do is you simply guide them across. And if they have any fears, you help to allay those fears. Any hesitation, you help to allay those hesitations. If they're afraid of what's waiting for them on the other side, you reassure them they don't need to be. If they're still attached to the living here in an unhealthy way, you help to reassure them that no, it's their time to move on. And if their help is needed, they can still give it. But they can give it far better from the other side. This is basically what the crossing ceremony is. You go into trance, you contact the spirit, you talk with them, and you literally take them by the hand and lead them to the entry to the other world. Generally speaking, you don't physically cross with them, but if you're practiced in these things, you can, because when you speak to spirits, that's what you're doing. But for a person who is not practiced at it, it can be difficult sometimes to come back because the feeling there is so much better than the feeling here. So that's something to be aware of when you're doing this kind of work. So, once again, we've had a fairly in-depth conversation today. I hope you've enjoyed it. And we'll see what tomorrow holds. I'll look forward to seeing you then. I love you all. I love spending this time with you. I hope that you're enjoying it as well. And let us close, as we always do, with our prayer. Divine Mother Goddess, Divine Father God, beloved ancestors, we ask you to help us to approach our lives with patience and understanding, to approach the people around us with patience and understanding, but also to set strong boundaries for ourselves and defend those boundaries when need be. Help us to maintain this difficult balance so that we are both patient and understanding, but also safe within our own boundaries. Beloved Mother Goddess, beloved Father God, beloved ancestors, we know you are always with us, but from respect, we thank you for your presence, and may you be blessed now and always. And I thank you for your presence. I love you all. I love this time with you, and I'll look forward to seeing you tomorrow. And may you be blessed now and always.